Okay, so feeling like you're trying to navigate a really shifting world stage lately.
Yeah, it's a lot. Definitely overwhelming sometimes with everything going on globally.
Right. And that's exactly what we want to tackle today in this deep dive, sort of cut through the complexity, get to the heart of what matters.
Our focus today is the current state of U.S. foreign relations, specifically looking at the intricate dynamics with China and the Middle East.
Especially, yeah, in light of recent developments around the Trump administration.
Precisely. And to help us navigate this, we've gathered some really insightful material. We're looking at media coverage, expert commentary.
All aimed at hopefully illuminating these complex relationships for you, the listener.
Yeah, our mission is pretty straightforward, really. We want to extract the most critical insights about these key relationships.
Look at potential future scenarios, maybe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And ultimately understand the fundamental significance of, what's happening.
Okay, let's dive right in then. China first. We've got some fascinating perspectives here. Yanis Varoufakis, for instance.
Ah, yes, the former Greek finance minister. He had a recent media interview, April 23rd, I think it was.
And he offered a really quite a striking take on China's position right now, didn't he?
He did. What really stands out is his view that China is showing a, quote, mature stance.
That's the phrase, yeah.
And he uses this powerful analogy, describes them as like an adult suddenly emerging among a group of children.
Wow, okay. That really paints a picture.
It does. And then he gives some pretty pointed advice to China regarding the Trump administration.
Yes.
Basically cautioning them not to expect the U.S. to just back down easily policy-wise, even if there's economic pressure.
Right. So change won't happen unless...
Unless, in his view, the American ruling class really starts to feel a heavy enough price. That's the threshold he identifies.
Interesting. Okay, so let's pivot to the Middle East now. We had that announcement from Karine Jean-Pierre, the White House press secretary.
Yeah, that was April 22nd, about President Trump's planned visit. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, May 13th to 16th.
And the stated goal is what? Strengthening relations.
At the official line, yes. Strengthening ties.
Which feels significant, especially considering some things we talked about back around March 31st.
Indeed. We were discussing the possibility of an early Saudi visit even then.
Right. The thinking was that maybe the difficulties with China and that whole Syria trap left by the previous administration.
Exactly. That those factors might necessitate this kind of outreach to Saudi Arabia.
And the analysis back then suggested that the strained U.S.-China relations might have pushed the administration towards Russia.
Which, as we discussed, was seen as probably not the most effective long-term play for managing those, three major foreign relations.
The Sino-U.S., U.S.-Russia, U.S.-EU triangle.
Precisely. And what's really fascinating here, I think, is this idea of China having a kind of special influence in the Middle East.
Beyond just politics and economics.
Yeah, it seems so. Even in places like Syria, where China isn't directly involved militarily, the analysis points to significant Chinese elements, especially in Gulf countries like Saudi Arabia.
So for the Trump administration, dealing with China isn't just about Beijing. It echoes in Riyadh, too.
That's the complexity, yeah. It adds another layer. China's sway in that vital region makes the whole Sino-U.S. dynamic much trickier.
And then you throw in the pressure from the Netanyahu government in Israel.
Right. Seeking U.S. support for their greater Israel dream, all while there are these internal power struggles playing out inside the U.S.
It really is a web. So this Saudi visit is the interpretation that it's mainly an attempt to, well, calm things down in the Middle East.
And signal importance to the Gulf Arab states. Yes, that's a key interpretation.
Driven, at least partly, by the headaches in managing the China relationship.
That seems to be the argument, that the difficulties there are, in part, forcing this move.
Okay. And looking back at the first, say, 100 days of the administration, the assessment seems pretty blunt.
Yeah, limited progress on those key relationships. China, the EU, Russia.
We even saw Dmitry Peskov, Putin's press secretary, saying on April 22nd that Russia wasn't familiar with Trump's Ukraine peace plan.
Which suggests, pretty significant disagreements are still there. Not exactly smooth sailing.
And connecting this to the wider picture, there's that upcoming summit, China, ASEAN, and the Gulf Cooperation Council.
That's right. May 2025. Malaysian PM Anwar Ibrahim announced it back in February.
And that lines up with the Belt and Road Initiative, doesn't it?
Clearly, it highlights that growing interconnectedness,
Yeah.
with China really playing a central role in that region.
Okay, so definitely a picture of considerable pressure on the administration, which brings us nicely to the tariff war.
Ah, yes.
Seems like there might be some movement there. The analysis suggests those first 100 days of foreign policy weren't exactly stellar.
Contrasted with growing friction at home, especially in finance, that triple whammy talks stocks, foreign exchange, bonds.
And the data seems to back that up.
Well, look at the U.S. dollar index. It's taken quite a hit. Over 9% down year to date, over 5.5% just in April.
Wow. Lowest since when?
April 2022. And the market interpretation seems to be basically a large-scale sell-off of dollar assets.
Okay, so significant pressure. And then Trump announces on April 23rd that he'd significantly reduce those high China tariffs.
Right after Janet Yellen had commented on them being unsustainable.
It almost feels like that prediction we touched on earlier about maybe having to, quote, surrender on tariffs, even if it's a slap in the face, potentially for financial reasons.
It certainly seems to align with that thinking, and the market reaction was immediate, wasn't it?
Dow Jones up 1,000 points, stock index rebound, treasury yields down.
Yeah, it really underscores Trump's ability to influence the financial situation, even if it means a policy U-turn.
Which raises questions about the core motivation, doesn't it? Is it broader interests or...
Well, the interpretation leans towards prioritizing personal gain, his interest group's financial health, and political survival, perhaps over those wider concerns.
Okay, let's dig into this Saudi visit a bit more. This idea of Plan A and Plan B.
Right, the sort of carrot and stick idea, the visit itself being the carrot.
So Plan A is the straightforward one. Stabilize the Middle East, mend fences with the Gulf states, find a better way to handle China.
That's the apparent public-facing goal, yes. The effort to manage things constructively.
But Plan B is seen as maybe the primary driver.
That's the interpretation, that it's more about serving the Netanyahu government's interests.
For what purpose? External leverage? Internal power gain back in the U.S.?
Both, potentially.
Yeah.
That's where the stick might come in.
How so? What kind of stick?
Well, the idea is Plan B could involve, say, tacit agreements, maybe giving Israel more leeway to act in the region.
In exchange for?
Support within those internal U.S. power struggles. And paradoxically, maybe that's seen as an indirect way to eventually stabilize the Middle East or even help with China down the line.
Yeah.
It's convoluted.
Sounds like a high-stakes gamble, really.
Definitely. And the suggestion is Plan B could even involve broader coercive moves, threats of military action against Iran, maybe, disrupting the Persian Gulf.
Which would certainly ramp up the pressure on Iran.
Hugely. Now, we also have to consider how Saudi Arabia might see all this.
Right. The analysis suggests they might view the U.S. as, what, a declining power.
And that their focus is shifting more towards cross-regional cooperation, particularly with China and Afghanistan.
So from their perspective, Trump's visit might just be a token gesture, a small carrot, as the analysis puts it.
That's the potential view, yes. That it doesn't change their fundamental strategic calculations much.
Which brings us back to those domestic pressures on Trump. It seems the main heat is internal, right? Divisions within Wall Street.
Exactly. That's emphasized. The disputes with institutions like Harvard and Yale are mentioned as examples.
And the whole tariff situation hasn't helped.
Apparently not. The analysis suggests the unsuccessful tariff war has actually hurt some of Trump's original Wall Street backers, caused losses, deepened those divides.
And Saudi Arabia likely sees all this internal U.S. friction.
Probably. Which might make them view the motivations for the visit with a degree of skepticism.
So for investors, maybe caution is advised, even with the dollar ticking up slightly.
The suggestion is, yeah, be cautious. There could be another market shift soon, maybe within 48 hours. Perhaps Treasury yields dropping again while the dollar index corrects upwards.
Creating more maneuvering room for the administration?
Potentially. And it's crucial to remember, even with this tariff talk, the expectation is the administration will likely keep up the underhand moves.
Like, what are we looking at?
Well, that terrorist attack in Indian-controlled Kashmir on April 22nd is mentioned. It happened right after VP Vance visited India.
And the suggestion is that might be the U.S. trying to pressure India regarding China.
That's the interpretation floated. And then you have India itself, on April 21st, imposing temporary tariffs on some imported steel.
Similar to what Vietnam did under U.S. pressure.
Yes, described as a kind of tariff-probing move towards China.
How might China respond to these sorts of things?
The analysis speculates China might signal its capabilities, announcing things like the non-nuclear hydrogen bomb development or the Red Flag 19 exercise as deterrence.
Meanwhile, India's PM Modi was in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, also on April 22nd.
Right. And the thinking there is he might be seeking Saudi help to ease things with Pakistan after that Kashmir incident.
Because of Saudi Arabia's connections to Pakistan.
Their financial backing, yes. And also recognizing China's influence behind the Gulf states.
So India looking for Saudi mediation makes sense from multiple angles: religious, geopolitical.
Even future development, like AI tech, where China's DeepSeek is mentioned. The bottom line suggested is that India probably doesn't want to be the main benchmark for an anti-China tariff alliance.
Because provoking China is risky, given their strength.
Their intellectual and military strength, yes. The potential consequences are seen as too negative.
Okay, let's shift focus squarely onto Iran now. The warning seems to be that despite Iran trying to maybe delay or deflect,
Trump might still consider a military strike. Yes, that's a serious concern raised.
why? To please Israel. Disrupt the Gulf.
Potentially all of the above. Engage in what's called two-way extreme strategic extortion.
Can you unpack that term a bit?
It basically means using the threat of really damaging actions to try and squeeze concessions out of multiple players at the same time, creating intense pressure.
And Iran's options are?
Pretty stark, according to this analysis.
Yeah.
Further compromise, maybe even surrender or resistance. It's a very tight spot.
And Russia's role in all this? They might benefit from chaos.
That's suggested, though Deputy Foreign Minister Rudenko warned about serious regional consequences of a U.S. strike, so maybe more mediation than direct involvement.
Right. And that visit by Trump's special envoy to Russia, the focus might not have been Ukraine.
The interpretation is it was likely more about the Middle East, about Plan B potentially.
Offering Russia concessions in the Middle East in exchange for...
For maybe looking the other way if the U.S. decides to disrupt the Persian Gulf, that's the speculation.
And if the Saudi trip doesn't go well and talks with Russia stall...
Then the motivation for a strike on Iran could increase significantly. To appease Israel, maybe ease tensions with Egypt and Jordan too.
So there's a real warning here about Iran potentially being pushed into further compromise.
Yes, becoming that unintentional benchmark for the anti-China tariffs and the U.S. gaining more control in the Gulf.
Which, it's noted, might even align with some hidden agenda Russia has in Afghanistan.
That's a connection made in the analysis, yeah. And China's joint military exercises with Egypt are seen in this light too.
As a way to bolster resistance.
To enhance the pressure resistance capabilities of both Egypt and Iran, yeah. A strategic countermove.
Okay, so what about China's overall strategy in the face of all this?
It's described as sort of doing its best and leaving the rest to fate.
Meaning?
Potentially focusing inward towards minimum economic internal circulation and maybe planning to help others rescuing those in trouble later on.
With an emphasis on their growing strength over time.
Exactly. That their capabilities and determination will only increase. The example given is Japan and the nuclear contaminated water.
Oh, so?
Well, initially China seemed unable to stop the release, but the analysis suggests that dynamic could change down the road. Things aren't static.
And it seems Trump's been putting pressure on Japan, too, after their economic revitalization minister visited.
Apparently so.
Yeah.
Trying to hype up the outcomes, push Japan towards being part of that anti-China tariff group, demanding more on trade and military costs.
But Japan pushed back.
Immediately clarified things, yeah. Showed reluctance to antagonize China, given the economic ties and China's strength.
Though there are still those elements within Japan. The Yasukuni Shrine visits.
Described as last-ditch strategic speculation by the extremely right-wing elements, yes.
And China's reaction to that was very strong.
Extremely strong. Warnings from the foreign ministry, the embassy, even the military network reviewing the first Sino-Japanese war on Navy Day. A clear signal of zero tolerance on core interests.
Okay, so this brings us back to Varoufakis and that advice for China's Ministry of Commerce.
Right. Let's recall those two key points from his interview. First, the advice. Don't expect the U.S. to back down until the American ruling class pays a heavy price.
And second, the observation. China's shown a mature stance, the adult among children.
And Varoufakis is interesting because he's looking at this from the perspective of U.S. capital interests, which still represent wider Western capital to some degree.
So that heavy price he mentioned is the argument that it's starting to happen now. with the financial market instability.
That's the suggestion, yeah. Driven by the internal fights over the tariff war.
But Trump's latest tariff comments are seen as just talky. For now.
Verbal, yeah. The expectation is he'll continue to cause trouble.
So the recommendation for China's Ministry of Commerce is seize this moment.
To critique the tariff policies strongly. Frame this reversal as just a small step in correcting a mistake. Expose it as Trump's second blink.
Show that U.S. hegemony is weakening, that even allies are creating distance.
Exactly. Contrast that with China's position, which Varoufakis highlighted.
Using that Australia example, regaining market share in China after the initial U.S.-China tensions.
That's a specific illustration used, yes. And the final point really emphasizes Saudi Arabia looking towards China for the future, beyond just oil.
Seeing China as the rising power, evidenced by that upcoming May meeting, the Trilateral Summit.
Precisely. It signals a longer-term orientation.
Okay, so bringing this all together from our deep dive today, it's clear we've navigated a really complex web: U.S. foreign policy, China, the Middle East.
Yeah, the strategic maneuvering of all these different nations, the underlying economic currents shaping everything. It's intricate.
And hopefully, for you listening, weaving through all this gives you a much clearer picture of these critical global forces, moving beyond just the headlines.
Understanding the deeper strategic drivers at play.
Definitely. So finally, here's something maybe to chew on. Considering this incredibly tangled web of relationships and the potential for sudden shifts.
Always a possibility.
What single factor, what single development or decision do you think will end up having the most significant impact on the global landscape over, say, the next year?
That's a great question to ponder. Lots of possibilities.
It certainly is. Something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.